Okay. So my name is Emily Trolia, and I'm a Practicum student with Academic Support Programs. Today's workshop is going to be on reading strategies. So if you haven't already, you can check out our website and see any of the past workshops that we've done throughout the semester. And then we are going to continue offering workshops every Tuesday at 2 for the rest of the semester. So be sure and check those out. And then if you can't make it to one, we always post them on our website shortly after. Okay, so here's a breakdown of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start out with an overview of the concept of active reading, and then we're going to kind of move into the importance of reading for class, and then finding a good time and place to get that reading done. And then we're going to end with a couple of different reading strategies that you can try and put into place, and then just some extra tips and tricks to keep in mind while you're doing your reading. Okay, so we often hear about the importance of being an active listener to let people know that we're engaged in listening to what they have to say. And similarly, it's really important to be an active reader. So, especially when you're doing this reading for school. An active reading can be defined as reading something with a determination to understand and evaluate it for its relevance to your needs. So, here are some examples of what you can do to practice active reading. First, you could take notes in the margins. So, marking up the text the first time that you read something is going to help you review it later on. And it's a good way to remind yourself of any questions that you had while you were reading it. So, you can work examples, ask questions, or make comments about anything that stuck out to you while you were reading. Next, you can highlight. But the one thing about highlighting is try not to go overboard. So highlight the words that stand out for some reason. If they're bolded, underlined, italicized, um, just try not to highlight, every single word to the point where, 75% of your page is highlighted because then it becomes difficult to pull out the really important information. So next, as you're reading, look up anything that you don't know. Um, so if something trips you up and you're not quite sure what it means, don't just keep on going because that's going to hinder your comprehension. So if you can't figure it out from context clues, just pull up Google, see what it means. That's really going to help you understand it better. Next, you can explain what you've read to someone else. So, whether you do that after a paragraph, a page, or an entire section, just see if you can explain it out loud or explain it to your roommate, your parent, whatever. Um, if you can if you can fully explain it to somebody else, then you probably understand what you just read. But if you can't quite get the main concepts when you're trying to explain it to somebody else, then you might want to think about going back to reread it. And then finally, you can quiz yourself. A lot of times, our books have learning checks or quizzes throughout. So you can take these. And if you're getting the questions right, then just keep moving right along. But if there are things that are tripping you up, you might go back and try and find that again in the text and see if you can reread it or ask for help. Um, you could also turn like headings or topics into questions and then see if you can answer these after the text. But we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go through the reading strategies. Okay, so now we're going to talk about why it's so important to read for class. Um, so, reading is kind of one of those assignments that tends to get overlooked a lot. Um, we see it in the syllabus, but there's not an actual due date, and your homework might seem more important. So, a lot of times the reading just gets neglected. Um, One thing to keep in mind though is no matter what you might think, the professor isn't going to assign you a reading that you're going to get absolutely nothing out of. So there's always something to gain for the class from completing the reading. So the textbook is just another source of content that the instructor can use to pull material from that's not class lecture material. So, reading the text is going to ensure that you have learned and have been exposed to all the possible content that they could use for quizzes, tests, homework, anything like that. And then next, professors have a limited amount of time in class. So, the text is going to provide more examples, charts, graphs, explanations, anything that the professor may not have had enough time to cover in class. So, and there are also often practice exams and quizzes that you could use to study and review those concepts. And then finally, reading before you go to lecture is going to ensure that you are going to class prepared and that you can engage and discuss and get more out of those lectures. Um, Showing up ready to talk about the material is going to help you understand the material a lot better than going to class and being lectured on something that you have no idea what the professor is talking about. Um, and if you're able to engage and answer and ask questions, the professor is going to be able to recognize that you're really putting forth some effort into their class, and they're going to appreciate that. And it might pay off come midterm or final exam time for you. Okay, so now that we know why it's important to read, um, something that's just as important is figuring out when and where you're going to do your reading. So, since there's often no set due date for reading, it's really best to set aside a time to read and stick to it. So, once you know what works best for your schedule, write that in and stick to it for the rest of the semester. You just got to create a habit out of it. Um, and that way, that time can be set aside for reading and not just doing other homework assignments. Does anybody have any set times that they like to do their reading? I know I like to try and get mine done in the morning. I feel like I get a little bit more out of it and I can focus on the reading a little bit better than if I just leave it till the end of the day or try and do it later in the afternoon. So next, you should try and pick a good location to read.
Morning.
What was that?
I said, I think for me, typically, early morning is best.
Yeah, I
Also
feel
on
like I can
weekends,
focus on it a lot better
I'm not
earlier
worried
in the
either.
morning. Sometimes we get a little bit worn out by the afternoon, and reading's the last thing you want to do. So when you're picking a good location, it might mean that you have to, go to a classroom or go to the library or a coffee shop. Um, you want to go somewhere where reading is what's going to be your focus. So once you know what location works best for you and you get there, just try and eliminate the distractions so that you can focus on the text. So you might need to, take headphones to a coffee shop or put your phone away, or if you usually study with your friends, reading time might be that time where you have to really be by yourself so that you can focus and absorb the information. And then next, set a goal for the reading. So it's not really realistic to just sit down and expect to crank out, 4 chapters in one sitting. So if you have set aside an hour for your reading and, it's going to take you about an hour to read 30 pages, make that your goal. And it's going to take you a little bit of time to gauge how long it takes you to read, but once you know that, base your goal off of your reading speed. And then if you just start out with a portion of it, you can reward yourself, take a little bit of a break, and then move on to the next chunk. Um, but it's best to just, take it step by step, little by little, and then you'll really work towards that full chunk that you have to do for the day. And then finally, like I said at the end, just reward yourself. So that'll give you something to look forward to by the end of it. So that instead of just, dreading it, be like, oh, I have 4 chapters to read by the end of the weekend. You can say, you know what? Well, when I finish my 4 chapters, I'm going to go to Handy Andy's and get a burger, or I'm going to watch 2 episodes of my favorite show on Netflix. Um, just whatever gives you that extra drive to get through the end of it.
What
Okay.
if
What
you
was
don't
that?
have time to do those rewards? I said, what if you don't have time for those? I mean, granted, I'm not a big TV show watcher, but still, 40 minutes seems like a lot of time to to have a compensation?
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be a lengthy reward, you know, it could just be taking a break or running down the street and getting a milkshake from somewhere. But it's really best, you know, to not get burnt out on things. You got to be able to reward yourself in there. So you could work that amount of time into your study time. So say you have 2 hours this day to do um, whatever reading or assignment that you need to do. So you could say, okay, well, I have this 2 hour block, and for an hour and a half of it, I'm going to be doing this work. But for a half hour, um, I need to work in my break times or my reward times because there's a lot of, I guess, research on this about how, you know, breaking up the work into smaller chunks and then taking smaller breaks between those smaller chunks really helps you absorb the information better and retain the information better. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And it'll help you not get burnout too as you go through the semester. Did that answer your question?
I think so. And physical exercise definitely seems like a good compensation because what with studying or reading, typically you're sitting, and doing
Yeah.
that all day just seems to be a drag on energy.
Yeah. And I know
So
I had a friend
it
that
seems like
used
you'd boost your energy by the exercise.
Yeah, I had a friend that used to do like 10 push-ups every page, or, you know, if you get up and if you're in a dorm, you know, just walk to the end of your hallway or something. Just get up and get that blood flowing, and you'll probably find that you're able to focus just a little bit better. Um, even if you just move a little bit while you're trying to get that reading done. Okay. So we're going to move on to some reading strategies and some tips. Um, so the two strategies that I'm going to discuss are pretty similar. One is called preview, read, and recall. It's a little bit more basic than the other one is SQ4R, and that stands for survey, question, read, respond, record, and review. Okay, so the PRR method, the P stands for preview. So when it comes to previewing, you know, you should just take this time to skim the text, figure out what exactly you're going to be reading about, how long it is, and then, you know, plan how long it might take you to read. So the skimming should be reading the title, introductions, looking at the charts, reading the questions at the end, just really trying to get a feel for what exactly they want you to gain for that reading. Um, and then once you know when you're going to get that reading done and you know what the reading is about, you want to actively read. So, you know, every so often check to make sure you're understanding it. Underline the key words that are highlighted in the text. Um, Highlight occasionally, you know, like we talked about, make sure we're not highlighting every other sentence, just those main bolded words, italicized words, or the key headings and points. Um, and then, you know, just take a break. Like we said, if you're getting distracted, take a walk down the to the end of the hallway, or come back to it in a little bit. And then finally, you're going to recall. So it's important to review the content that you just read immediately after the fact. So that's going to help you retain the information a little bit better. You can go back and look at the headings and turn those into questions, and see if you can answer those questions about the heading. Or if there are questions throughout the text, go back and answer those. Regardless, you want to try and go back and reinforce that information in your head after you've read it. Okay. So the next reading strategy is called SQ4R. So since it's a little bit more involved, we're going to show this video about it first. And then after we watch the video, I'll talk about it a little bit more and give you some more examples.
Hi students, Welcome to reading using the SQ4R technique. Let's get started by familiarizing ourselves with what SQ4R stands for. The S stands for survey, the Q stands for question, and the 4Rs are read, reflect, recite, and review. When reading a piece of writing, begin with surveying, which is when you examine the text heading, also known as the title, the author, who wrote the article, passage, or story, and the date of publication, when it was written. When surveying, it is also important to skim the main headings, the subheadings, illustrations, and bold and italic words. Taking note of these will let you in on some of the key details of the text. Also, don't forget to read the first and last sentences of all the paragraphs, as this will give you an idea of what the overall topic is while you're reading. Next, you will begin to question the text by preparing questions that can be answered by the text itself. It is important to ask questions starting with who, what, where, when, how, and why. You will be using these questions to make sense of the text as you read, and they will be important in the 4 R's that follow. Reading is exactly how it sounds. You read. While reading, don't forget about the questions you asked in the question stage, as you can begin answering these questions while carefully engaging with the text. After reading comes reflecting, where you think about and evaluate what you have just read. During this stage, it is also a good idea to provide a brief summary of the contents of the reading. Additionally, look at the questions you asked in the questioning stage and make sure you were able to answer all of your questions. If not, reflect on why your question was unable to be answered by the text. Next comes the reciting stage, where you self-reflect and determine for yourself whether or not you understood what you just read. This can be done by re-skimming the text, as well as going over for the final time the questions you asked, as well as adding to your answers if you feel that you have left something of importance out. Lastly, to finish off using the SQ4R technique, review the completion of your work and identify any areas of further questioning, interest, and discovery. Thank you for watching. I wish each and every single one of you the best of luck in becoming the greatest reader that you can be. Created by yours truly, Miss Kiss. Hi, students.
Okay. So like she said in the video, SQ4R stands for survey, question, read, record, recite, and review. So to start out, you're going to survey or skim the information. So just so you can familiarize yourself with what you're going to read. So you want to read the introduction, read all the headings and subheadings. If there are charts, graphs, any kind of visuals in the text, check those out. And then read the conclusions or the wrap up text that's anywhere in there. Um, you really want to be, you just want to become familiar with what you're about to read so that you don't go into it just without any idea of what it's going to be. So next is going to be question. Take out a piece of paper and turn the headings into a question. So for example, if you're reading your physics book and the heading is Newton's first law of motion, a question that you could write down is, what is Newton's first law of motion? Or what is the importance of Newton's first law of motion? The question should be something that is going to be answered within that chunk of text. And then next, you're going to read. And we recommend starting out with one paragraph at a time. Read the paragraph, stop, make sure you've been concentrating on it. You can comprehend what was said. If you need to, go back and reread it again. So after you've done the reading, you should take notes about the main ideas and the supporting details for each paragraph. And just take this time to write down 1 or 2 sentences that really pull the whole paragraph together. And these sentences should contain the answer to the question that you asked before you started reading that paragraph. So next, you want to recite your sentence out loud, whether that's to yourself or to a friend. Just verbalize whatever you just wrote down. And then finally, you want to review. So once you've read the entire section, chapter, or document that you were assigned, review each of your sentences all together. So that's just going to pull everything together paragraph by paragraph, and you will have all of the key concepts from that entire section that you had to read. So this whole review section, you're going to be able to answer all of the questions about the headings, and this should be able to tie everything together that they wanted you to gain from this reading. And then as you're reviewing, make sure that you can define the key terms that they talked about, or make sure you can identify the importance of the key dates that were mentioned in the introduction. So if you can go back and read the entire introduction and the entire summary or conclusion, and you can, check off each thing, be like, yep, I can identify that. Yep, I can define this term. I can tell you what happened on this date. Then you really got the main idea of what the text wanted you to understand. And if you're in EDHE 101, there is a section on SQ4R in your textbook. So you can go back and, look at this visual, and I believe there's like a practice piece of paper that kind of shows you how to break it down paragraph by paragraph, and what you should be doing for each paragraph. Okay, so just some key takeaways of what we talked about today. So even if you can't formally implement one of those strategies every time you read, these are just some things to keep in mind while you're reading. So like we said, don't be afraid to mark up the text. Instead of just highlighting or underlining, make notes in the margins, work the examples that they give. And then if there's something that tripped you up the first time around, make note of what that is in the text, so that if it confuses you when you go back to review it, then you have those notes there. Next, check for comprehension. So you can summarize the text in your own words, make study guides or quizzes for yourself, or even use the self-checks that are in the text. Just make sure that every so often you're checking to be sure that you actually understand what you're reading. And then finally, a great way to better absorb what you have read is to try and make connections. So you could use concept maps or study guides to make connections to the information, whether that's the information, covered throughout the whole section that you read or between chapters. We had a concept mapping video last week, so you could go back and watch that and see how you could make concept maps help you remember this information. And then we're also going to have another one in a couple weeks, so you could check that out too. But concept maps are a great tool just to make sure that you're really understanding the entire main idea of the topic. And then if you want to create a study guide from the material, that's going to pay off when it comes time to study for the exams. Okay. So as always, be sure to check out the other workshops that we're going to offer throughout the rest of the semester. Next week, we're going to be talking about creating a post-midterm plan, because it's hard to believe, but we're already at the halfway point. And then, like I said, all of our past workshops are on our website, and then we're going to continue offering them on Tuesdays at 2 for the rest of the semester. So I'm going to stop the recording, and then